Welcome to the spring semester of Moral Theology. This is offered through St. Joseph Arimathea Theological College out in Berkeley. For many years, the seminary has worked with online courses like a lot of the other universities are doing now. As far as the brick and mortar, it's not highly attended, even though they seem to do very well. But with ours, that you just can't take a couple of years off and go and spend that time out in California at the seminary and just leave your family behind. So we're working with the online courses, and they seem to be very successful. This may be the first offering of moral theology through this type of a program, so I'm looking forward to going through the material with you. I've got the syllabus here in front of me. I don't know if it comes up in a mirror image or if it's showing backwards or whatever. But anyway, we'll go through the syllabus and talk about the books and what I've designed the course as to achieve with us. The first week, and we're actually running just a little bit behind. I apologize for that. This has been quite an undertaking with getting the class recorded. I was working on the whole class for this, so what I'm going to do is kind of give an introduction. I'll get that up posted. We'll see how that works and then get into the material. I was working on the class for the material, and all of a sudden there comes an error message up, and it says the webcam program has an error and it's getting ready to shut down. And that's exactly what it did. So I'm glad I did not actually record the few comments that I made. But I've got as a setup here, I've got a room in the house back here in the back where I get away from the dogs and the barking and all that. And I've got the computer set up on a phone book, and it's the Yellow Pages from Raleigh, North Carolina, and the date is 1998 to 1999, so they really never go out of style. But I guess you can tell this is probably a room that we don't really use a whole lot. But the first week's offering through moral theology, the first material would be biblical morality, the Bible and ethics, and the duty of religion. Along with this, that I sent out an email last week and told you what to look over, that we're going to look at the 10 Commandments, and they are what's kind of set up as our basic morality. And then we're going to look at the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus gave some different teachings to go along with the 10 Commandments. So we're going to take a look at those, and also the Sermon on the Plain, because they are supposedly two separate occurrences. There are a lot of commentators that like to say they're the same thing, and it just depends on what area you were from as to whether it was a mount or a plain, on however they called it. But we're going to look at those as two different occurrences. One of the books that I'm going to use in conjunction that with the next 3 lectures, we're going to look at ethics. And there's one book that Bishop Upham and I had talked about using, and it's a very good book. It's Christian Ethics by R.C. Mortimer. Actually, the same Mortimer that we're going to use the elements of moral theology. The Christian Ethics is a very well written book. It's actually, in some cases, 3 to 4 times more in cost than the ethics book that I ended up recommending. I talked with Father Paul Russell, and he recommended that over the Christian Ethics, that it has the basic offerings. But I am going to use the Christian Ethics, and I'll certainly let you know where that occurs during the lecture time. If you want to purchase that book, I think it's somewhere in the $40 to $50 range. It's Christian Ethics is the title, and it's by R.C. Mortimer, and it's certainly available. I've seen it several places offering to purchase that book. It runs a few chapters. Let's see how many it does have. Oh, it looks like it has 8 chapters. So it runs a little bit like the ethics book that we have. That one runs into about 14 chapters, but they're a little bit shorter in reading, and this is the ethics book. And, yeah, it's kind of backwards on me, so maybe it shows up straight on you. I thought I'd clicked up the mirror image on this, but anyway, we're going to cover the chapters of this book. It runs in the moral revolution, and it ends up with the virtues of ethics. Gives you a little bit of further reading. So we're going to go through this, and with the study of ethics, it really does build your knowledge. Whenever we look at a course, a new discipline, we're actually learning a language. So we're going to learn the language of moral theology, which actually does cover ethics. And with the Christian ethics, and of course the book by Arthur Holmes offers it well, but with the Christian ethics, we're going to look at the theological virtues and the cardinal virtues. That when we get into the book on hearing confessions, it's that we are looking at these, that where did the error occur, where the sin really took over and is the reason that the person wants to come to talk to us and to offer a confession and receive absolution. We'll talk quite a bit about that. After ethics, we are going to jump right into the elements of moral theology, and that's the R.C. Mortimer book. This one's got a little age on it here. I actually had run some copies and put it in a notebook. I do this with a lot of my books that I use, and put them in a notebook, so you'll see there's the substance of that, the smaller book. So it just kind of comes into play with making notes and comments, and it saves me from marking up the book, because it's an older book. I think it had like a 61. It was originally copyrighted in 47. I believe the copy that I have is from 1961. So I like to kind of hang on to them and treat them right, even though I do mark up books pretty well from time to time. With the moral theology, we actually get into it in a big way. We use our ethics along with this, and we do get into the virtues in some detail with the theological, the faith, hope, and love, and then with the moral virtues, the fortitude, temperance, justice, and prudence. So we're going to really dive into that and find out what makes us work and how we should act. We're going to talk about our conscience and how that comes into play with this, that it's very important. We will make references every now and then to the cartoons where you had the little angel that was sitting up on one shoulder, and you had the little satanic figure that was sitting on the other shoulder, and how they would whisper in the ear and try to make you do certain things, especially with the evil, that things that we shouldn't do, but they were trying to say, oh, it's perfectly fine, it's going to be okay to go ahead and do this, it'll work for this time. It sounds something very similar to the story of the Garden of Eden, where the serpent talked to Eve and kind of made it sound like it was okay to go ahead and take that fruit and take a few bites of that, and she passed along to Adam in the same way. So we're going to look at the moral theology as well. That's kind of what it all breaks down to, and we're going to take a spring break. That's a class break after we've had about 8 weeks of this, so you'll probably be ready for a break and to maybe get caught up on some reading, or maybe do something that you would like to do. We're also, as one of the parts of this course that I wanted to do is read the book by C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity. And this is an older copy. It's a leather bound. It's been around for quite a while. I'm talking about marking up a book. I'm not sure that there's not a word or margin that has not been underlined or written in. But I've read this book several times. I'm sure most of you read it in high school, maybe some in college, and possibly just to read it for something to read. C.S. Lewis, this is probably one of his harder books to read. The first several times I read this book, I really didn't care a whole lot for it. It seemed to be very hard to read, and in some cases it didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But I'm taking a degree program from a college, working on a PhD, and of course trying to get something squared away with that, and one of the courses, the book was Mere Christianity, and when I read that, this time it just fell right into place. It's to me, it seemed to be a book that was written on moral theology. It was just put in layman's terms. So we'll go through this one. I've set up a couple of classes where we read this. It's, C.S. Lewis set this up in what the sections are 4 books. So we'll read 2 of those books right before spring break. Then we'll come back and read the others and talk about them. And one thing that I wanted to achieve with this is that it could be a very good book for some Christian education with the church, an adult inquirer's course or something along those lines, because we can suggest that our parishioners take advantage of the sacrament of penance, and sometimes I've actually preached that from the pulpit, offered it in certain ways to let people know that this is one of the sacraments that we do offer, and that it's a very important sacrament, and just ask and you shall receive. But we don't get a whole lot of people that actually take advantage of this. So by going through the book Mere Christianity, it may help someone actually want to talk to us about the sacrament of penance and possibly to go ahead and to receive that sacrament. That the confession is a very important part of what we do as priest, and of course the bishop as well. But if you are just taking this course, if you're discerning a vocation to ordain ministry in the diaconate, or if you're just discerning to see if this is where you want to go, or if you're just taking this as a course to become familiar with it, you'll actually see how all of this comes in together and works towards what we're going to end up with as far as the book on hearing confession. It may lead you to where you may want to consider taking advantage of the sacrament of penance as well. With the last book, and this is where I've actually run a copy off. Like I mentioned, I don't like to mark up my books too much if it's an older book. So I actually go up and I run a copy of this off and have it comb bound. I can flip through it fairly easy and take notes. And of course there's the top of the page where I can write certain notes. But this is a very good book on confessions. The one I have was published in 1974. It's Hearing Confessions by Kenneth Ross. It's a very good, concise book on confession. Gives us a good historical and a theological view on this sacrament of penance. It talks about the priest's role, what we're actually supposed to do as far as talking to someone about the sacrament and actually carrying them through the confession. Once we get started with this, I'll as well bring in St. Augustine's prayer book, and as well with the priest manual. Those are the 2 forms that you'll probably see used the most, and if you are a priest, then those are the ones that you will probably use more than likely to be the St. Augustine's prayer book, where you can actually give the penitent a copy of that, and they can go through it as well with you. I always find that it's a good thing to educate someone on the sacrament of penance. There's several books, and when we get into that point, I'll bring a few of them up from my library and show them to you, and we'll talk about them. As far as letting them know what the sacrament of penance involves, how they should prepare, especially if it's their first confession. You will get some repeats on confessions, but for the most part, you're going to work with people that it's probably their first time. So there's a lot of education that goes into the sacrament of penance, and then as well, we can also let them take the copy of that prayer book home with them to read over the order that's in the prayer book and what's going to be expected. They're going to have a lot of questions about the penance, what actually we're going to work with as far as that's involved. So we can kind of tell them, and also have an idea when someone comes to you to talk to you about the sacrament of penance, that they would like to make a confession. And we can't talk to them right there about it, because As it was explained to me when I took this course at the seminary, that your IQ goes from wherever it may be when you walk out of that confession with that penitent, that your IQ goes down to about 5. This is something that you do not talk about outside of the confession with that person or with anyone else. I have known some confessors that have actually asked in the confession, said, well, would it be all right if this is something that we'd talk about afterwards, that if there's something that you want to talk about without being in the confession, would it be okay if we talked about it? But that really shouldn't be something that you talk about, because and we'll look at what our responsibilities and our liabilities are with the confession, that once we've talked about something in there, we don't want to carry it outside. So we don't ask them for permission, because if they give us their permission, gosh, we could probably talk to just about anybody that we would want to at that point. So that's certainly something that we're not going to work with. We'll talk about this, as I mentioned, what that all boiled down to is the seal of confession, what our responsibilities are, and why we leave it right there, that once we walk out, it's all gone. As far as the confessor, I look at this, and a lot of others look at it in the same way, that once we give absolution in the confession, that those sins or sin, whatever's been confessed, they're gone. They're gone forever. Just like we're told in the Bible, as far as the east is from the west. So as far as the confessor, that's the way we should feel about it as well when we walk away, that we are far removed from it as well, as far as the east is from the west. So we leave it right there and do not carry it any further. With the way the spring semester works, and especially with being involved with the church, whether you're a deacon, a priest, or if you're a lay person that's just taking this course, that you probably do take an active role in your church anyway if you're going as far as taking these courses through the seminary. So we are going to observe Holy Week and Easter week. So we'll take those 2 weeks off, and when we come back, we will basically be finishing up with the course. We'll finish with the last few chapters of the Hearing Confessions by Kenneth Rawson as well. We'll go into a little bit of exam review, and then I'll have something prepared for a final exam to kind of pull the whole course together, and we'll wrap it up. Now, as far as the quizzes, you did receive a quiz with the notes that I sent out last week. That little quiz, it may become a little more apparent to you when I get the material for the first lecture, the Biblical Morality, Bible and Ethics, and the Duty of Religion. It may become a little bit more clear for you with those questions, but I wanted to see how you think, how you go about with discerning these questions, and especially with that last one. That last question, what would you rather be under, the Ten Commandments or the teachings for the Sermon on the Mount, the Sermon on the Plain? And that's really like a logic question, so I can learn a whole lot. This is really a new venture for me with this type of teaching, where I record a lecture and then post it. You watch it or listen to it, ever how it works for you on your end. And then with the quiz is really the only interactive part of the class that we have. I have done lectures with Father Russell where we had interaction with some type of a program that was very, I can't remember the name of it, but it was very similar to how Skype works. And I have done a class with homiletics on Skype. So we get some interaction. There can be some questions asked. It really goes very well, but this is something that we do now, is that we just post the lectures and we get the interaction through your quizzes. So I do invite you that if there's anything that you would like to work on with the courses in particular, certainly send me an email to that effect. With the questions, when you write, I put to kind of keep it concise. I guess 6-8 sentences, maybe some of them could require up to 10 sentences or something. But the reason for that, and I'm not going to just say, oh, you wrote way too much if it goes into more than that. But what I don't want is for you to write me a booklet on these questions. And this goes into the practice too of what we do for homiletics, that we preach for roughly about 10-12 minutes, somewhere in that range. Sometimes it goes over a little more, especially if it's an Easter or a Christmas sermon or something very particular with a feast. So I remember Archbishop Moore saying several times with homiletics that if you can't get a point across in roughly 10 minutes, then you really don't know the gospel that well. You don't know how to get the points across. So with being concise with your answers, it first of all tells me that you really do have a good understanding of the material, but as well that you know how to present it. And that becomes very important when you may be in a situation where you're teaching a Sunday school class or some kind of an adult inquirers class, and it helps to get those points across, that you want to make sure that you set it up to where there's some understanding, that you just don't keep rambling and rambling and rambling on and finally get to a closing point. And then for someone like myself that would take that and try to draw something out of it, that if you have an understanding of the material, sometimes it gets very hard and you have to work on kind of piecing parts of it together to make sure that you have the whole, because with these questions and with other courses you'll take, the instructors are looking for maybe 3 or 4 different types of discussion with points that they're looking for with the questions, and sometimes they're separated quite a bit with a lot of discussion. So we'll work on that, and it'll become very easy. It was one of the hardest things that I had to do when I started studying with my vocation. When I first came in and studied for the diaconate and then studied for the priesthood, especially with the diaconate, I came out of a field where it was a lot different, and to take something where volumes and volumes of books are written on certain topics, and then for us to have to come down and write something very short and concise, it was not an easy thing to do for me, but it has certainly come a lot easier over the years. So don't think that it's something that you're having a hard time with. Don't get frustrated with it. Just keep working, and you will have a lot of success with it. So this kind of ends up with the introduction to the course on what we're going to work on and the expectations from the syllabus. Now, I've got the books there, and like I said, if you wanted to add or look into the other book that I'm going to be referencing for the ethics, Christian Ethics by R.C. Mortimer, you can certainly look into that. There may be a copy of it somewhere online that you would be able to access for free. I'm not quite sure about that, but I know there are a lot of sites where you can go for certain things like that. There is a reference that I'm going to use that I found is a very good book on confession. It's The Priest as Confessor, and it's by A.H. Baverstock. And that's another thing that I've run off because I didn't want to mark up the book. It was a fairly old book. So I don't know if I can find a date on this one or not. He gives his preface in 1914. I do have a couple of books down in my library that were published in 1897 and 1898. They do not go out of the house. But this Baverstock certainly brings in the biblical direction for the sacrament of penance and talks quite a bit about it. So I'll be referencing that as well. There are a lot of different books that you can purchase on these topics, the ethics, the moral theology, and the hearing confessions. The only thing I put in a little bit different, I'd like to mention, is Mere Christianity. I think that can certainly help with the understanding, and as well, if you did offer that as something for Christian education or an adult inquirers class, you may educate people to a certain point where they would want to talk a little bit more about the sacrament of penance. So I look forward to carrying you through this information. I actually look forward to going through it myself. It's with everything that I do as far as teaching and preaching. I taught this past summer at seminary. I carried you through the the course on homiletics, and we did have the practicum on homiletics for the actual preaching, and that certainly works out very well and helps. But I learned all kinds of things, and that's why I kind of miss the interaction. It really helps with the learning process. But we'll work through that and make the best of it. And if there's something that I can be of help with you, certainly don't hesitate to contact me, and we'll work from there. So I will get this introduction posted, and I will work on go ahead and getting the first lecture with that first section, and we'll get caught back up. So I appreciate your patience with this. Actually, the technology part of this has been quite an undertaking for me, and to get to where it will actually work. So this part I know is going to work because I've done little bits and pieces and went back and watched them and listened to it. The only thing that I may need to work on, as I mentioned, is another microphone. You may have to work with speakers on your computer so you can actually hear it where you don't actually have to lean in and work hard on listening. I could not really hear much when I just played it on my computer, but when I got the speakers hooked up, it certainly helped out. And I guess you can tell I've got a bunch of old technology that I'm working with, but it seems to all come together. So anyway, I will see you soon with the second lecture. So have a good day, and we'll talk to you soon.